Okay, fine. So what I was saying, guys, um, that the topic that we are going to cover is DO 280. It's a course code, and the exam those who wants to write, it's a EX 280. It's an exam code, and the version that we are using going to discuss ahead with the 4.10. Okay, fine. So let's just go ahead and try to understand our product, that is our OpenShift. So what product it is exactly, and how this OpenShift is came to the market, that we are going to do decisions. Okay, my screen is visible, right? I'm just drawing something. Can you able to see? Hope this is visible. Can anyone just acknowledge,
Yeah.
please?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Fine. So, the first of all, we will go ahead and discuss about the earlier versions that we are trying to deploy the applications on the top of the virtual machines or the physical machines that we have. Okay. Once we will go to the earlier days, so how exactly we are deploying our applications? We used to deploy our applications. So we will have particular hardware. On the top of the hardware, we are installing one operating systems. On the top of the operating system, we used to install our libraries, binaries, what are all the required for this, for a particular application. Suppose if you want to deploy one Nginx application, so you will have to install all the libraries and binaries for that particular application. Suppose this is what my application is. Okay. So in the earlier days, whenever developer wants to deploy their applications, they will have such OS. On the top of the OS, they used to deploy their application. So what all are the resources is going to be used? Resources I am talking about, guys, the memory, the CPUs. Okay, these all are the resources, or file system, whatever the file system, whatever the memory, CPU, these all are the resources we are telling. So those resources is going to be used by this particular application, that will be taken from the base operating systems, right? The base operating system. Suppose my base operating system is having 4 GB of RAM, and suppose 1 TB of ROM, or 1 TB of memory that we have. Okay. So then what all are this application is going to be used this particular resources, right? Or suppose if I do have 100 GB of RAM, so this application, whatever are the resources is going to be taking, that will be taken from this particular operating systems. So at this moment, what is the drawback that we have found in the previous days, that suppose if I have a multiple customers here, okay, if I do have a less number of customer, if I could say, and they're trying to access to this particular applications, so what will happen? Most of the resources will be unused. Okay, the less resources is going to be used, because I do have a less number of customers here. So if I do have a multiple customer or number of customers, they can able to use the applications, then after that only the resources is going to be used. But as I do have a less number of customers, my most of the resources is going to be unused at the moment. Okay, if I do have only 3 to 4 number of customers, then uh, they're trying to access to this particular applications, so this application will be used on a few resources from your operating system, whereas the most of the 80% of resources is going to be unused at this moment. So to overcome such kind of problem, we are coming with a new concept called virtualizations. Okay, we are coming with a new concept called virtualizations. I think most of the people, those who are Linux admin, they used to use this virtual machines to deploy the applications. Still, I could say, because in my previous organizations, when I used to work in the Linux as a Linux admin, I also used to use some virtual machines on the top of the VMware. Okay, so so this is what the earlier days that we used to deploy our applications. The developer used to deploy their applications, but the drawbacks that we have found here is that most of the resources is going to be unused, just because if you do have a less number of customers. So to overcome such kind of drawbacks, what we are coming with a new concept called virtualizations. Okay, virtualizations we are calling it. So what is this virtualizations? So it's a simple thing. I think most of the people are aware of this. So in the virtualizations, we do have a certain operating systems. It can be anything, guys. Windows, it can be Linux, it can be Mac, it can be iOS, any operating system they are going to use. So on the top of these operating systems, they will be trying to install one hypervisor. So most of the companies, they used to use the VMware, VirtualBox, right? So these all are the hypervisor we are telling. Hypervisor. So on the top of the hypervisor, they used to deploy the virtual machines. Okay, this is one VM. So according to your requirement, you can just go ahead and create your own virtual machines. So I think most of the people, they know that how to install these virtual machines on the top of the hypervisor. even though I would be taking one sessions to show you the creating the VMs and installing the Docker as well. So I will tell you on that part. But this is what the virtualizations, guys. If somebody wants to install the virtual machines, they must have some hypervisor. Hypervisor is nothing but one applications, I could say, so which is helping us to deploy the virtual machines. Okay, so instead of deploying the applications on the physical machines, now the developer will go ahead and deploy their applications on the top of the VM. Now this is what application. So multiple application can be deployed on the top of this VMs, guys. And let me tell you guys how this VM is going to be built. Okay, I think most of the people know about this. So the VM will be built by using the ISO image, guys. So if somebody wants to deploy the CentOS VM, if somebody wants to deploy the Ubuntu VM, if somebody wants to deploy the Red Hat VM, so they must have the ISO image. Through that particular ISO image, they are going to install the virtual machines. And after creating these virtual machines, they will be telling to the developer. So that part is been done by the administrator, guys. Creating the VMs and all that should be done by the administrator. Okay, Linux admin people. So once that has been done, then after he will be informing to the developer, hey developer, I just have built one virtual machines. This is what the IP address, this is what the root password or whatever the username password. So try to log into the VMs and deploy your application. So now the developer will log into the VM and he will deploy the applications. But what is the drawback that we have found in the virtualizations part here is, if developer, being a developer, I will tell you guys, if you are a Linux admin and I am a developer, I will tell you that I need a VM and I wanted to deploy my applications on the top of that VM. So what you will do, guys, you will go ahead and download the ISO image, or if you have kind of any kind of template, by using the template, you will go ahead and install the virtual machines. But it used to take 1 day to install the VM, guys. Why? Because getting the approval, creating the template, use the after creating the virtual machines, do the post build activities, it used to take, guys, at least 1 day. And then the developer should wait at least for 1 day to deploy the applications on the top of the VMs. So that is what the drawbacks the developer has found, and developer can't wait to deploy their applications on the top of the VM. So that is what the drawbacks that we have found on the virtualizations part. And I wouldn't say that companies or organizations are not using the virtualizations. Yes, I could say yes, guys. Now also 20-30% organizations, they're still using the virtual machines to deploy their applications. But 70-80% companies or organizations, they used to deploy their application on the top of the cloud or the containers that we have. So to overcome such kind of a problem, we don't want to wait to deploy the applications. We don't want to wait for 1 day or 2 days to deploy our applications. The developer can't wait on that time. So at this moment, what the developer needs, a certain time, a small time span, they wanted to deploy the applications on the top of the container. So that container can be built in a fraction of a second, so that we are moved from this virtualizations to containerizations. Okay, hope you guys have understood about the virtualization. So, and this virtualizations, guys, I would say, guys, that part that I missed is the virtual machines, the resources is going to be used by this particular virtual machines is going to be taken by the operating system itself. Okay, suppose now this is the virtual machines, I want to assign a 4 GB of RAM, 1 TB of ROM. So that particular resources is going to be used from this operating systems, guys. Suppose operating system is having 8 GB of RAM, and after this 4 GB, now it will be left with 4 GB of RAM. Okay, suppose that 2 GB I can give it to second VM, something like that. Okay, so what are the resources is going to be used by this particular VMs, that is being taken care by this operating system resources. Okay, but the drawbacks, I already have told you that the drawbacks that we have got from this virtualization is, the drawbacks that we have got from the virtualization is we have to wait for 1 or 2 days to deploy their applications. Okay, so to overcome such kind of problem, we are coming with a new concept called containerizations. Okay, and what exactly the containerizations I would be telling you now. So containerization is something like it can be, the container can be deployed in a fraction of second. Whether if you will compare with the virtualizations, whenever the administrator, the Linux admin used to take 1 or 2 days to deploy the VM, at this moment, if somebody go and use the container, they can deploy the container, or they can deploy their containers. They can use this container in a fraction of second, guys. I could see some of the background noise from anyone. Harshita, can you please go on mute?
Yeah, sorry.
No problem. Thank you. So, I was just saying, guys, that to overcome such kind of drawbacks, we are coming with a new concept called containerization. So, what exactly the containerization is, and how this container can be built, and what are the containerization tool that we have, that we are going to discuss now. So, how this containerization is working here? So, first of all, in the same thing, the base, you always have to use one operating system. So you can use the Linux operating system, you can use your Windows operating system, any operating system you can able to use. But on the top of that, instead of installing the hypervisor, we just go ahead and use some containerization application that we have is Docker. Not only Docker is a containerization tool, we do have multiple applications that we are using as a containerization tool, guys. Podman, we do have Rocket, we do have, okay, this kind of applications or the containerization tool that we're using in our environment also. But the Docker, most of the organizations, they used to use the Docker and Podman. Podman is an enterprises one, which is a product of Red Hat. Okay, let me tell you guys, it's Podman. Hope you guys have heard this name, Podman. Okay, and let me tell you, I will be also covering the basic Docker. I'm telling you guys only the basic Docker, because some if you wanted to jump to the OpenShift, at least you must have basic Docker knowledge. What is Docker? How this containerization would work, and how exactly we are going to build the container. And after building the container, how we are going to deploy our applications on the top of the container, that we are going to also discuss in the Docker session. So Docker session will be around 3 to 4 days or 5 days max, where I will be discussing about only the basic Docker, guys, not in the depth, only the basic Docker, from the installation and the Docker part. Okay, the basic Dockers we are going to discuss. Fine. And I was just telling you guys, after installing this operating system, you must have the Docker applications, which will help us to deploy our containers on the top of the OS. So this is just an applications, guys. As you have the Windows application, suppose if you want to install Chrome, Firefox, this such kind of a Docker one applications you do have, and we are calling it as a containerization tool, which will help us to build, spin up the container. So how this container can be built? Okay, so we are going to discuss now. If you will talk about this VM, if you will compare with this virtualization and the containerization, what is the difference you will find, guys? The VMs, the virtual machines that is going to be used in the virtualization part is having the ISO image, right? Because without ISO image, a template itself, inside this template, we do have this ISO image, right? So without using this ISO image, you cannot build the VM. And the same moment, without using the container image, you cannot spin up the container. We are calling it as a container image. So here we are calling it as ISO image, we are calling it as a container image here. So if you will compare with the ISO image and container image, guys, only the size difference, I could say. So size difference and the huge size difference, I could say. Whereas the ISO image, if you will compare with a container image, ISO image, at least if I will talk about the Red Hat Linux, it is having 9.2 GB. Latest Red Hat RHL 9 is having 9.2 GB of ISO image. But if you will compare with the container image, the container image will be at least 230 to 40 MB, something like that. And why this 230 MB and why this is 9.2 GB, guys? Because whenever it's having all the package, all the libraries, binaries, everything will be there and mixed up in this ISO image. Whenever you will install it, by default, it will have some kind of by default repos will be configured by using this ISO image. But if you will be using this container image, it is not having any packages, nothing. It's very lightweight, just because it is not having the by default packages that we used to use in the ISO image. Okay, so that's why the container images are lightweight. Okay, it's not having it's not having any packages inside it. Like if somebody wants to spin up the container by using this container image, and they wanted to use the IP also, they wanted to see the IP addresses also. For that IP address also, they must have to install the packages. Okay, they must have to install the packages to only to check the IP address as well. So there is a package we do have called IP route 2, IP route 2, which is a package which is required to check the IP address. The IP space A command, it depends on this package, guys, IP route 2. Even to check the IP address IP route 2 in the container, we must have to install this IP route 2 as well. I will show you while building the containers. So that's what I was saying, that container images are lightweight, and ISO image is, you can see it's much like it's huge size we do have in this ISO image. And another thing, why this VMs are like DMs is having this huge sizes, just because it is having its own kernel also. Whenever they're going to deploy the VM, it's having its own kernel. But this containers, it's not having its own kernel, guys. These containers are running as a process in your operating system. Suppose if you will check with ps-ef, you could able to see the containers part. Okay, this container is running as a process in your operating system, whereas this VM is it's having its own kernel, but the container is using the base operating system kernel. Okay, and that is why also containers are lightweight. It's having the minimal packages, guys. It's having the minimal packages. So that's what I was saying. And to speed up the container, it will just take fraction of second, guys. If I want to use the CentOS container or Ubuntu container or Nginx container, I will show you also how much time it used to take to spin up the containers. But at the same moment, if I will tell you to use or to build a CentOS VM, you must take 30 to 40 minutes to build and create this VM. But at this moment, the container can be built in a fraction of second. So this is what the containerizations, this is what the virtualizations, and this is what the the physical machines or the data center machines were used to deploy the application. So now most of the organizations are preferring now the containerization, just because it's taking a short period of time for a developer to deploy their applications on the top of the container. So after building the container, it will just act as a VM itself, guys. Okay, I will tell you, I will show you also. So once this container has been built, the administrator will build the container. He will be giving the information to the developer. Now developer will log into this container. After that, he will be telling to the external customer to access to this particular applications. Okay, and this time it's very short period of time to deploy the application for a developer to deploy the applications on the top of the containers. At the same time, if they will be using the VMs, it will take at least 1 day for administrator to spin up the VM. After spinning up the VM, the developer will log in and deploy the applications on the top of that. So don't worry, guys, how this container is going to be built. What is the container? How could we get these images for container images? Where we can find it out? So that we are also going to discuss in our Docker classes. So this Docker classes will be for 5 to 6 days. It's a basic Docker only. There I will be showing you how to build up the container or how to spin up the container, how we can after spinning up the container, how can we log into the container, and how can we deploy, by being a developer, how can we deploy the VM deploy the applications on the top of the container, that we are also going to discuss. So now, any questions from your end, guys? I will just take a 1 minute break here. Can you just tell me if you have any questions? Could you just unmute and just ask me any questions? Any questions from your end? Hope you guys have all understood. So I don't want to repeat this again, but I think unmute